Hi there, welcome to another episode of the Colton Boutique Show. Joining me today is a very special guest, Lisa Perrotti-Brown. Lisa, hi, how are you doing today?
Good, thanks. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Can you tell us what led up to the launch of the Wine Independent? What was that like? And how does it compare from being the editor-in-chief at the Wine Advocate?
How does it compare? Well, it's difficult. The two are similar, but they're very different concepts as well. I think the biggest difference between working for Robert Parker Wine Advocate and doing my own thing at the Wine Independent is having total creative freedom to be able to do whatever we want with the Wine Independent and do things the way that we feel and we know are right, but also to be able to go a little bit deeper into some of the storytelling, both visually and with words, and really getting that story behind the story when it comes to high quality wines and the wines that the people are likely to want to know a little bit more about, and quite frankly, wines that interest me, as a consumer and a wine lover as much as somebody who writes about wine.
Are there any regions that you're excited to be going to see that you may necessarily not have been able to work on at the Wine Advocate?
Not really, no. I mean, I've worked in the wine industry or written about wine for oh God, I think we're coming up to 30 years now, which really sort of ages me. But I've visited probably every major wine region of the world now, and certainly all of the ones that I've wanted to go and see. So it's not really a matter of being able to visit those regions. I'll be able to have a little bit more freedom and flexibility, of course, to cover wines and regions, but I'm very much so of the opinion that you really need regional experts looking after regions as well, particularly, when they're doing them comprehensively, which is what we want to do. So we will be taking on new reviewers. In fact, we've just taken on a new reviewer, and we'll slowly be taking on reviewers to cover the wine world. But for myself, the most exciting new place that I get to go to, which I'm going to in just a couple of weeks' time, is Sweden. I've never been to Sweden. And of course, the Wine Independent, our base now is in Sweden. We've got a small group of Swedish shareholders, none of who have any interest in the business of wine, but are all passionate wine lovers. Who have backed the business, and my business partner, Johan Berglund, who is a photojournalist, professional photographer, has been photographing wineries for many years, lives in Sweden. So I'm going to Sweden in a couple of weeks. They do make some wine in Sweden, apparently. I haven't tasted it yet, but I'll have to report back on that.
I make good music as well.
They do. They do. ABBA, Swedish House Mafia.
Quite an eclectic taste, absolutely. What is it about the Wine Independent which is different from any other publication which is out there?
Well, there's a few things. I mean, I think I've talked generally in the press about the independence part. Of course, we are independent, and we put the name right up there in the title because we want to make that clear to people that we have no interest in the wine industry. We don't take any money from wineries. We pay our own way, and we're free to speak our complete unbiased opinion about wines, good, bad, ugly. The other thing is, of course, the storytelling, the visual storytelling. So the level of professional photography that I think you can already see on the website, but that we will expand upon more and more as the publication grows, is for me just as important as the reviews and the writing, because we really want to evoke those emotions behind wine. We want to elevate people's experience of wine through what they see on the website and also what they read, and to make the whole process of learning and knowing more about the wines that people love, buy, and drink just a little bit more of an emotional experience. So that's the other thing that we're doing. And, I've changed around the database a little bit. I've been working in wine criticism for more than 13 years now, and have helped to develop the Robert Parker database, for example, which has become the database for most other wine criticism publications that are, some of them that have been offshoots from members who have left the Wine Advocate, but just about everybody's using the same sort of system of database search. We've made a few changes and modified a few things to make it easier for people to find the wines they love first without automatically going to, filter by score. Which is probably the most annoying thing for me, is when people, just look at the scores and the high scoring wines first. Because the score tells you absolutely nothing about the style of the wine, or, what the character of the wine is, what it's going to taste like, or even if the person reading the review is going to like the wine, because there's a whole world of different styles out there. If you just consider Chardonnay, for example, you can either have, a very light bodied, elegant, minerally, lower alcohol style, or a very big, rich, fruity, oily, higher alcohol style of Chardonnay. And, some people love one style and some people love the other style. Or you're like me, you're just in the mood for one style or the other. But finding that, you can't find that just by looking at the reviews. So what we've done is add a few new filters on the website, including filtering by alcohol level. You can filter by body level as well. And myself and all of the critics we have will be trained on how to evaluate body across 5 different levels: light to medium, medium to full, and full bodied, so that people can, really home in on the experience that they want from that wine. We've also done the grape varieties a little bit different. For most websites, well, all other websites, you'll see for something like a Bordeaux varieties, all they have in the search is Bordeaux varieties. You can't necessarily see if a wine from Bordeaux or made from those Bordeaux varieties is more Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, or even Cabernet Franc. With us, what we've got now is we're not doing blends at all, where a reviewer can put in just a generic Rhone or Bordeaux blend. What we have is, you have to put in the major grape variety as a filter, so Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, or Cabernet Franc, and then saying whether it's a blend or 100% of that variety, which means that somebody who's looking through a Bordeaux report of over 1,000 wines, from the 2019 vintage, for example, can very easily find the Cabernet Sauvignon dominant wines or the Cabernet Franc dominant wines, and just filter into those because that's the style they love. And then they can look at things like scores and actually have time to read a much shorter list of reviews. So that's how we kind of mix things up a little bit.
Now that does sound really incredible, because of course it's a lot more user friendly, and it's a lot more simple as well. And you're right, because when you do look at certain websites, it can get quite, there's too much almost, generic information there. So when you're looking for something very specific, like you said, it get kind of lost within the, just within the complete database, basically.
Yeah, it's why everybody stampedes to the scores. I totally understand it. There's no other way of quickly filtering through, a large body of reviews. But now, we really want to put the consumer in the driving seat and say, look, what style of wine you love. We're going to help you find that style, filter down to that style first, so that you've got a much smaller collection of wines to look at that all match your style and what you're looking for.
Sounds excellent. And you reside in the Napa Valley yourself. And what we've seen from our business perspective is that the wines from the Napa Valley have only started to gain more traction outside of the US. But the quality has always been there. Screaming Eagle have been producing wine since 1992. Other top wines such as Scarecrow and Dominus and Ridge Montebello have been making great wines from there for years. In your opinion, why do you think it's taken so long for these wines to have more of a global platform?
Yeah, it's a really good question. The problem with Napa's lack of international recognition has always been a strong domestic market. When I was living in Japan in the early 2000s, I was working as a wine buyer for a Japanese importer. And I wanted to bring some of the great names of Napa and some new discoveries over to Japan. And so I came on a buying trip here, and I was talking to everybody, and I say, okay, do you want to sell us some wines? We'd love to import your wines in Japan. And although they were happy to put on a tasting for me and host me, they were like, yeah, nah, it's too easy for us to sell our wines here. It's too much hassle to try and export. So until very recently, you just haven't been able to find a lot of the great Napa Valley wines, even some of the smaller established wineries like Spotswood or Dalla Valle anywhere else in the world. And so the world doesn't even know about these names for the most part. It's only recently where they've started to recognize, oh yeah, I need to, get my name out there and into the great cellars of the world, and then on those restaurant lists of the world, so that people, actually recognize me wherever they go. And so that for me has been like, a game changer for Napa, that you're starting to see these great labels all over the world, and it's very exciting.
It is very exciting. And the unfortunate thing that's not as exciting, unfortunately, I need to bring this issue up, is that there seems to be these wildfire issues, whether it's global warming or whatever other factors are influencing and impacting negatively, the future of Napa Valley. From what you're seeing and through people that you're speaking to over there, what does the future hold, or what may it look like in years to come?
Yeah, it's a tough thing, and it's something that everybody here who's making wine in Napa Valley does a lot of soul searching on. But natural disasters happen everywhere. This is agriculture, and winemakers, they can't control Mother Nature. They'd like to, think that with modern viticulture and with all of the modern winemaking, you can somehow control it, but you can't. And climate change is everyone's problem. It's not just Napa's problem. And, in some areas, they're experiencing, different impacts of climate change, whether it's extreme, bouts of weather, and even in Bordeaux in 2021, we saw, extreme rain and heat and mildew and botrytis and everything else. It's a difficult vintage, and it makes it very difficult to make great wine. And largely what Napa and everyone else has to do is they need to work with Mother Nature. They need to understand and accept what's going on and say, okay, how am I going to do this? How am I going to ensure that every year I'll have some wine to provide my consumers, and so, here we've got the 2020 vintage that's about to be bottled in Napa. Obviously a very difficult year here. We had 2 major fire incidences. The second one, blanketing the valley, largely just before everyone managed to harvest. Some people had some fruit in when the second fires came through. And some people have been able to make a little wine, and that's important. I think it's important for people to try, and some people made some wine. It was too smoke tainted, and they eventually had to dump it. Other people discovered that they had batches of wine that weren't smoke tainted, and they were able to bottle some of that, even if it's a tiny quantity, to be able to express the vintage and to even be able to offer their consumers at least, a few bottles from that year. And I think that's the important thing is look, yes, we have a big issue here. We're in the middle of a very bad drought here, still in Northern California. It's very dry. Everyone's on tenterhooks about what's going to happen this season. Everybody's cleared their land as much as possible so that there's nothing to burn around the wineries, taking up all of the brush. We've got PG&E burying power lines. We're doing everything that we can in our control to try and stop these things from happening again. But in the meantime, we have to accept that, we're not going to be able to stop everything. And so we're just going to have to, make the best of it, try and do something. And if nothing can be done, then yes, you have to declassify and hold true to what great wine is, because there will be critics like me out there, naming names. If it gets bottled and it's smoke tainted, then yes, I have to say, yeah, I believe that wine's smoke tainted, and leave it to the consumer whether they want to purchase it or not.
Well, fingers crossed, things can improve there. But of course, it's better to be honest than dishonest. When it comes to wine criticism, though, and you've touched on a great point there, there have been talks over the years about parkerization, about critics just giving big scores for the sake of being given big scores. So top wineries will say, come back to our vineyards, come back to our domain, our chateau, whatever it is, and come and taste our wines. So they're given favorable treatment. With more of an ongoing push for more transparency these days, how do you assure subscribers that with what you see is what you get?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think a lot of reviews and scores published nowadays are designed as marketing material for wineries. I think score inflation is real. There are so many wine reviewers out there now, and everyone wants to be heard. And the easiest way to be heard is to make sure you give the highest scores. That way, all the wineries and all the retailers talk about you and reproduce your scores. And then suddenly everybody knows you. But if wine critics don't have the trust of consumers, those people that actually buy and drink the wines being reviewed, they are just winery advertising masquerading as criticism. Consumers have been burned a lot by critics. So trust, I think, is slow to come. And there's a good reason for that. It takes real guts to be honest these days. And I think, in many ways, I was one of the first people to call out things like smoke tainted wines. You can read my reviews from back in the days when I was reviewing Australian wines on robertparker.com of some of the smoke tainted wines from the 2009 vintage in Victoria. Yarra Yering springs to mind. And when I was reviewing the 2017s from Napa, I was the first critic to step up and name names regarding the smoke tainted wines. More recently, I've caught a lot of heat for some of my scathing reviews of the 2021 Bordeaux wines. Only 20% of the 600 plus wines that I reviewed from the 2021 vintage in Bordeaux were over 90 or above. Most of those scores were in the 80s. There were a lot in the 70s, somewhere in the 60s. And if you look at the competition, other wine criticism websites, including the one I used to work for, more than 60% of their scores from the 2021 vintage in Bordeaux were over 90 points. You just think, well, how can that be? And nobody else is even producing reviews of wines that score lower than 80. Where is the honesty? I just find that so shocking in a vintage like 2021. Consumers need honesty in reviews, and it's not always pretty. And you know what? There's nobody quoting me out there for any wineries or retailers for the 2021 vintage, but that is not what it's about. It's about being honest to consumers so that they can make educated decisions about what to buy or what not to buy. I already talked about, accurately describing the styles of wines to give people a realistic indication about the style of wine that they're purchasing, but quality is just important. Quality exists across a broad range of styles. And even though the 2021s in Bordeaux were a lighter, more elegant, lower alcohol vintage, hey, I'm all for that. But they just weren't ripe either, and there's a whole bunch of problems going on there with the tannins. So really, I think, coming back to how we can make that assurance to our readership about, what we're doing, about our independence, about, our honesty in this era of score inflation, is just to be honest. And it's going to take time, for people to read you again and again and again and trust what you're saying. When you're accurately describing a style of wine, whether it's the bigger, bolder, richer style or the more elegant, fresher, lower alcohol, minerally style, that you're saying where it sits qualitatively next to its peers, across all the wines that you've experienced in your lifetime, and that's what's important, is just telling it like it is. And then eventually, hopefully you become the voice that people can trust, because, all you do is once you're dishonest with a review and somebody buys that high scoring wine and they're disappointed, and then they don't trust you anymore. Hopefully they don't think the problem is wine criticism, and they choose their critics more carefully.
Absolutely. Now, you are one of the few hundred of masters of wine in the world, which is a very intensive process. Could you explain the process in achieving master of wine?
Yeah, well, it's a long process. Let me tell you, it's not for the faint-hearted, and it's not for anyone who wants to get a quick qualification. It took probably about 5 or 6 years to get master wine. And I should say you start from a high level, because you have to apply to go on the program, and they're looking for highly experienced individuals, experienced tasters, but also knowledgeable in the theories behind, and just have real, on the ground experience before you even, get onto the program of studying for the Master of Wine. But it's really, broken up into 3 different parts. The exam is, the exam itself takes place over a week, and you have to write essays on everything from grape growing, winemaking, the business of wine. Understanding the global business of wine is incredibly important. As for myself, actually, I work as an examiner, or a paper chair, I should say, for the practical part of the exam now, which means the tasting part of the exam. So it's a part of the exam that I know very well from both sides of the spectrum, where we put together the list of wines that will be tasted blind over a 3-day period. So there's 12 wines each day that the students are given 2 hours and 15 minutes to sit down and assess, and they have to be able to talk about grape variety, region as closely as possible, vintage. The quality is increasingly important. Obviously, something near and dear to my heart, but being able to assess quality in any aspect of the wine industry is probably the most important thing that you can possibly do, without knowing, what the wine is. So that's becoming increasingly important. And then, a few people make it through every year. I mean, it's not a high pass rate, and the way that we assess all of the exams is, we have a group of examiners on our practical side, which is what I can speak to. There's never any one person who looks over any of the papers. All we get is a candidate number. We don't know anything about that candidate, gender, or anything, where they're from. We do know, we are told if English isn't their first language, so we can give a little bit of leeway if their English isn't absolutely perfect when we're grading the exam, but that's all that we know. Basically, if the best candidates usually shine through head and shoulders above everybody else. Those are the people who are prepared, who really put in the experience. It's a bit like running a marathon. It's you get to this where you're a top athlete by the time you come to sit the Master of Wine, and it's really, for me, very impressive to see the performance that some people put in, because they are wow, really stunning. But it's like I said, not for the faint-hearted. It's a long journey, and as I always say to people going on that journey, you have to love the journey too, because you'll meet some of the most special people, and make some lifelong friendships along the way.
Very nice, very nice. Thank you for sharing that with us. Moving on, what was it like working with Robert Parker? What was he like as a person? And if you could name one good solid piece of advice, or a couple of different pieces, what would you say is one that stuck with you still to this day?
Well, I got to say, working with Bob was great. Anybody who's ever met Bob Parker, he's the opposite of wine snobbery. He's so down to earth. He's so amenable, and immediately puts you at ease. And that said, the man is an absolute genius. I mean, he really has this palate memory that I've never seen anybody else have. The way that he can recall wines that he's tasted before and see them when he's tasting them again, whether it's blind or not. Just amazing. But he got this way. I mean, he was self-taught. And this goes, when we were talking about the Master of Wine, that's one route you can take, and that's the route I took. But, it's incredible what he taught himself. He's read everything. He's an avid reader. He loved and loves continues to love to read books about wine, very technical ones to, ones that are more entertaining, and has traveled the world of wine, and so knows it all firsthand. But the bottom line is, it's just very fun to work with as well, and continues to be a mentor for me and someone that I look up to. I do, think about, some of the gems that he's told me over and over and over again, and when we've been working together. And I live my wine criticism life by those. One of the ones that I'm constantly thinking about that he would say to me was that, some of the nicest people in the world make lousy wine, and some of the worst people in the world make extraordinary wine. And the thing is, you have to only judge the wines. You can't think about who's making them. And this is something I think that rings true for anybody who's in wine criticism, because if you're in Bordeaux and you're doing primeurs and you're meeting very personable winemakers and chateau owners and things like that, and they come across as so friendly, or don't, it can be difficult, if you become too close, if you become chummy with these people, and you have to give them a bad score. These are the realities of the job that we do. If the wine is lousy, you got to call it like it is. You can't show favoritism. And likewise, someone who's just been a real jerk to you. I remember Bob's story about, when he went to visit, he was called to visit Cheval Blanc, the previous owners of Cheval Blanc before the LVMH days. Because it was felt that he got his review of one of the wines wrong. And he knocks on the door, prepared to re-review the wine, to give it another chance to look at it again. And the owner sends his dog out, and the dog bites him on the leg, and he's bleeding. And he's, Bob has to ask for, a tissue or something to wipe the blood off his leg, and the guy's so unapologetic, and he puts the wine down, and Bob tastes it. And, to his credit, he saw that the wine was not as bad as he had previously judged it. He re-reviewed the wine. He upped the score on it. He admitted that he'd made a mistake on that, and he still wears the scar to this day on his leg. So this is the way we have to be. These are the stories I remember most about Bob. It's, the honesty and the fact that, you can't get too close to the people that you're reviewing. You have to only look at what's in the glass and tell it like it is.
Thank you for sharing that with us. And you've clearly got very nice surroundings. If a flood was to hit you right now, what is the one wine in your cellar or in your collection that you would rush to save before heading out?
Oh, I'm not very precious about the wines in my cellar, but I did think about this, and I would have to say probably be a case of wine. I'm thinking if I have time to get a bottle, I'll grab the case, because my daughter was born in 2005. And in 2005, actually, I was tasting around Bordeaux. I tasted during primeurs in 2005. And there was this one wine that I loved so much, and it, I knew I had to have. Well, I've got a few cases of it for her birth year, and it was Rose en Seigle, which is at that time made by John Colassa, It was for me, not obviously the highest scoring wine of the vintage, but just such a beautiful, pure perfume Margaux that has this structure that's going to keep it going for many, many years. And so it's a special case to me because I can't wait to give it to my daughter in another few years' time. Actually, you can drink here in California until you're 21, but on her 21st birthday. So that would be what I'd say.
Sounds very nice. Very nice. And what are some of your favorite food and wine pairings?
Oh, I'm not a real food and wine pairing nut. Obviously I appreciate when you do have that experience when you've got a great dish and it just marries so well with wine. And, I know that there are some chefs and some sommeliers who are just like, they have a gift for doing that, for putting two things together. But I will say, there were two foods out there. Was a food and a wine that I didn't really appreciate until the two came together. And that is Sauvignon Blanc and goat's cheese. These two things, I was never, a big goat's cheese fan. I am now because I've found the types of goat's cheese that I like. And again, same with Sauvignon Blanc. I love, certain Sancerres, but not generally, a huge fan of the grape. When you put those two things together, something magic happens. They just seem to each taste better than standing alone. And so that's one of my favorite, when I'm thinking about, well, is there something about food and wine pairing? I always think of those two things and think, yeah, there is. But I try not to be too dogmatic about the whole thing.
I'm going to have to try that tonight then and report back to you.
Yes.
If it doesn't go well, I'll be complaining on Twitter to you. But
awesome. Thank you. Do.
From Bordeaux and Napa Valley, are there like any wines or producers that collectors and or connoisseurs should be keeping an eye on?
That's what I'm always looking for. that was for me, those are the biggest stories, when I'm looking for, what's the next, real deep dive story that I'm going to do on a chateau or a winery, whether it's here in Napa or it's in Bordeaux. I'm looking for, either, a familiar name that's on, an upward trajectory because changes have taken place, or I'm looking for someone who's, new to the whole scene and doing something, that's either different or just, phenomenally good. So that's kind of what it's all about. And what I'm really happy to say is probably too many to name out there, and the more that you go delving into the regions and really, coming into these things with your eyes open, not just looking at things like the 1855 classification and, of the royalty here in Napa, but really sort of, going through the areas with your eyes open and spending a lot of time, I'm really spending 14 weeks this year in Bordeaux, as well as living in Napa and really getting to know it inside out, and always looking for hot tips. So I'm not going to name any names right now, but I'm just going to say that there are so many great discoveries still to be had in these regions, and not all of them cost an arm and a leg, and I'm always on the lookout for a bargain, and that's hopefully what I'll be highlighting more and more for our readership.
Lisa, it's been absolutely great speaking with you today. Thank you. Just before we go though, what is coming up next for the Wine Independent? What can subscribers and people expect?
Well, for myself, this week I'm finishing off a vertical of Ponte Cane that's going to be publishing next week. So that's fun. And I've also got the new releases from Harlan Estate and Bond that will be coming out a little bit further afield. Actually, I mentioned earlier, we've just taken on a new reviewer for one of the great wine regions of Europe. And I'm not going to say any more about it now, but we're going to announce probably, I'm thinking next week or the week after, because this person is working on their report right now, and we should be publishing it either at the end of June or early July. So that's the big exciting news for us. And, you know, right now, I mean, I hate to say it, the Wine Independent is just Johan and I. Oh, well, I should say we do have another photographer working for us as well, Svante, also from Sweden. But we will be taking on more and more voices to cover the whole wine world very soon. So I'm on the lookout, but also already in talks with people, and we've just taken on one person. So we're growing, and hopefully we're growing very, very quickly. So that will be the next big thing that we'll be announcing.
Sounds absolutely incredible. Well, Lisa, thank you very much once again for joining us. And thank you too for joining us here at the Culture Boutique Show. And until next time, all the best.